Good afternoon, everybody. And it is 1 o'clock on April the, 3rd? And welcome to the 39th CALLERLAB Convention. I gave you the date. My name is Roy Gotta. I'll be moderating this session, which is working with squares and rounds. I will let the panelists tell you more about themselves as they start each of their sessions, but just to introduce them, we have Don Casper from Mannheim, Germany. And since he's a caller and cuer, he'll have to talk about working with himself. We have Ron and Georgine Woolcock from Olympia, Washington. Ron is currently and Georgine are currently chairman of Round-a-Lab. We have also from the state of Washington, Bob and Claudia Amsbury from Spokane, Washington, and they are heavily involved with the National Square Dance Convention coming up, and I'll leave it at that. Okay. So, normally the moderator will kind of give their presentation first, but I'm going to let the other people go, and then I will fill in the blanks unless they defer to me and whatever. But I have a handout up here. You're welcome to come up and get one at any time. It won't disturb us. So, we will start with Don.
Right. Hi, everybody. I hope you're enjoying yourselves here in Nashville. My name is Don Casper. I'm a square dance caller and round dance cuer. I've been doing both since 1979. I'm a member of the European Callers and Teachers Association since 1979 as well. I've been ECTA round dance coordinator for a total of 10 years and ECTA vice president 1 year. I guess that's why they asked me to be on this panel, because I do know the subject from both sides, working with squares and rounds. And when I started, most of the dances that we had were squares and rounds. So there seemed to be some working together, but lately it seems like we've been working beside each other or sometimes even working against each other, which I have seen, and I don't like that at all. Things to take into consideration. If you know you're going to be on a program, if you've been signed to be on a program as a caller, and there is also a cuer, and perhaps other callers as well, what you need to do is work together. Each one of you, as an individual, has a program that they've probably got planned in their mind, what we're going to do first, what we're going to do next tip and things. And it's nice. The callers will usually get together and what can we do together, any tips we want to do together. Not that you're going to involve the cuer that much in that same thing, but if you need to plan the whole program, where are your highs, your lows, your high energy, your softer things, and also know that let that cuer know what he's got, what you've got planned together with the other caller, and make sure get him to respond to and saying, well, if you're doing that, then I'd like to do that. And try to work out a program together. The time to do that is not at the dance, during the program. That needs to be done in advance. Today, in this modern digital age, you're not going to just have one of these where everybody comes up and uses the same equipment, drop a disc on there, and go. You're going to have several pieces of equipment. I think everybody's going to bring their own laptop, perhaps MP3 player or whatever they've got. So you may have a string of 5, 6, 7 pieces of equipment up there. The important thing is that you've got to be ready when it's your turn to go. That cuer has to be ready when it's his or her turn to go, because that's what the dancers do not like. They're out, they came to dance, they paid to come to the dance, and if the people on the stage are fiddling around, how can I connect that to that and all, and then they test and it's not coming out, that's not the time for that again. Anything like that has to be done in advance. And because both of you, the caller and the cuer, and I'm saying caller collectively if there are more of you, both of you are responsible for that dance being a success. And also for your future bookings probably. And the dancers will catch on to who can work with whom and who can't. Huh? There are some certain etiquette things that we need to realize. If you're the caller and you've done your tip, dancers are coming up to you, sign my book. Where can I get that latest release that you just presented to us? You need to get them off to the side. Shh, keep them quiet, because the cuer is ready to do his job. And the same thing vice versa. The cuer can't, well, it's time for the caller to come up. The cuer can't be up here fiddling with the equipment again and taking away from the caller's time. It's got to be a team effort. One thing to do about that is know what type of equipment you might have. Be ready with backups just in case your equipment has a flaw, perhaps, as we've said in several other sessions. Make sure you know what type of hardware there's going to be, that you have the right cables. Don't expect the caller to say, well, if you've got that, I can plug you in here. He might be able to do that. Again, all of this has to be done in advance. And you've got to respect each other when you're out on the stage. I've seen that. When I've done a program, most of my programs, I will say right now in Europe, where I have been the cuer and rather than the caller. But when my own club has done something, I have worked as cuer and MC, so I have done some squares and introduced the guest callers. But in Europe, I'm known as a good caller, but I'm known as a really good cuer. So I tend to stick to that side. However, I do know, because I'm also a dancer, I do know what I expect as a dancer when I go anywhere and see callers and cuers on the program together. And I have gone from people really working with each other that we've even done something together, a circle of dancers around the outside, and the square dance caller is calling a tip, and the cuer is cueing something to the people outside, and it does work. There are a few routines where we can do something like that. That's been the extreme good side. The extreme bad side is when there's really been some animosity, and the dancers can feel that, and you certainly don't want that to happen. Right? You've got to respect each other as professionals, because they're doing the same job that you're doing, entertaining the dancers. Things to avoid are conflicts. Be there on time. Be there extremely early. If you know that the two callers have something before that, perhaps advanced squares, fun squares, singing calls, whatever, before your round dance program starts, make sure you're there at the beginning of the program too. Callers and cuers working together. If there are open rounds and the cuer has provided equipment, it's not nice for the caller to come in and disrupt that last set of open rounds fiddling with his equipment. Yeah? Be there before the show starts. More will come. If you have any questions about anything, perhaps from your own experiences, ask. That's what I'm kind of hoping this would be a participation thing, and I know Roy and Ron will have lots of things to say that they've experienced as well. But if you have any questions, go ahead and ask.
Thank you, Don. I think what we'll do is we'll do the presentations. Keep your questions in mind, write them down. Although if you think you'll forget it by then, go ahead, raise your hand. We'll call you. Or if you really think a salient point needs to be made. But we'll go through the presentations, and then we'll do a Q&A. And Ron, I'm sure, will be able to answer all your questions. But let's go to Bob and Claudia now. Bob from Spokane, Washington. Bob Amsbury. You are allowed to sit up here.
Well, that's all right. I wasn't sure I can do that. I'll stand here. Bob Amsbury, Spokane, Washington. My first wife, Claudia. Raise your hand. Oh, my ex-girlfriend. That's true. I started calling in 1970 and also started cueing in 1970. And I did both for 20 years. So I've kind of got one side because I did both. And then the last 20 years, Claudia has been the cuer and I've been the caller. And in the Northwest, round dancing is huge. We have a mainstream program that's pretty exclusive all over, and we have a good round dance program. I've worked with not as many cuers as possible because when I first started, there were several. I can remember doing a festival in Montana, and I won't mention the gentleman's name who was a caller. One of my first ones, anyway. He was finished calling, so I went up and started playing my music, and he just came running over and says, no, I want 1 minute, I want one full pattern record, which is 5 minutes before we start the next round. And he was in charge. And I go, okay. So I just backed up because he was in charge. He was a national caller, an excellent caller. So I just waited, and I kind of just stood there, and he looked at me finally and go, okay. And all night long, I didn't put a needle on until he told me to do it. And I'm not used to that because in Washington, we do the tip, and then we go right into the rounds, 2 rounds, and go back to the tip. So timing is important. But the key here, too, is we didn't communicate in those days as much as I think we need to today, round dance / caller. As Don said, and all of them, even pick up the phone the night before and just talk to who's going to be there. I've called enough that there are several around the area, and a cure can, if the dance is not successful, it could be because of the cuer, not the caller, or vice versa. And when I called and queued for 20 years, it was always me. Nobody could blame anything but me. If it's good, great. If it's bad, it was me. That's not true today in most cases. But it takes 2 people to pull it up, put the dance on. And you just want to talk to them. Somebody has to be in charge, and it's something you got to share. And yet, if you don't share, one's going to take over the other. It's just the way it is. Somebody's going to do it. They're going to call their tips too long, so the queuer only does 5 rounds instead of 10. Or vice versa. You're sharing the program, so you got to be polite to them, but work with them because we're professionals. People are paying money to come in the door, and you're giving them a service. And I feel that it's important that you do that. Okay, if you want to be booked again or come back, it just really, really helps. Equipment. I mean, Ron said that it's nowadays. I can remember cuers had their own equipment, including speakers. When you went to a dance, and the caller had his own equipment and speakers. And that's even in Spokane. That's not true anymore, but as they said, you've got to know what's here, what it takes to do, and what is the tone, what is the volume. Don't go, how do I do that? What do I do? Or et cetera, et cetera. You got to be familiar with it, even if it's ahead of time. And nowadays, not everybody uses computers and et cetera, but know the environment before you even get involved, because it makes you relax. If you don't know, you're going to go, ooh. During rounds, the floor is always noisier than during squares. And that's just the way it is. If you're not aware of that next dance. So the cuer has a challenge because people are talking a lot louder than they are with squares. Because they're on the sides and the round dancer's trying to go and he's trying to move, and it's just the way it is. You just got to be aware of, okay, what do I do to make this better? The volume, have somebody on the floor help the cuer, up, down, whatever. A caller can be off in his timing. He can not be heard on all calls, and dancers can struggle through it, not a round dancer. If I got a foot in the air, you better tell me what to do because I'm going to be in trouble. And I'm Ron, right? No. So you got to be able to hear the cuer just as important as the caller. Claudia and I now, most times if I get asked to call, I try to use her as a cuer, and I will tell who's ever trying to run a contract. And even though they got their own cuer, it helps financially, but it also we work well together, and we have been for 20 years. We talk well, and she helps my program. I help hers. When she's done doing her last round, she automatically always starts my patter record because I've got it set up. All she's got to do is hit P. And once it's played, pause, and so the music is on the floor the minute she's done. Because I like to do rounds, and I'll do all the rounds that she cues. But I just like to dance. But I got the music going before, and she'll say square dance time, whatever. So she's helping me, and then she knows what records to play to help the floor. A round dancer can kill the level of the floor just as easy as a caller can. And yet, you don't want them up here all night, but there are certain round dances they love them. That's the ones you want to put on the floor. So as soon as she's done and the music starts, the hoedown, they're already on the floor. They're going to stay there. They're not running off the floor. You want to keep the dancers there. Keep them going. And if you work together, and it's not going to work all the time, but if you just work together, works what don't work. And again, I'm fortunate because I got a cuer it's good, and we do it together a lot, and that helps. Because I can have an off night, and she can have an off night, And once in a while, I jokingly say, I think I'll cue the next one. I still can cue. I don't do it, but it's just kind of a gimmick, and she'll laugh, and she says, I'm going to call. We don't. We do have a couple that we do, but not really. But it's, again, just flavor. Listen to the people on the floor as you get out. When I go out and dance, it's just, we work together, and I think we do the best. We know Ron and Georgine very well. They used to live in Spokane. They actually took square dance lessons from Claudia and I years ago. And they're super people. Yeah. And then he got transferred and went to Olympia. Olympia. And now he's up here. See, I got to look up to him, but that's okay. They're good people. That's about all I got to say. So.
Thank you, Bob. Everybody out there still okay? Next on the program, also from Washington State. How many of y'all are going to Spokane? It's too many. Ron Woolcock.
Thanks, Ray. By the way, Bob and Claudia were our original teachers that taught us how to round dance along with square dancing. So it's kind of neat to have your mentor in here, to go through.
You guys still have some work to do, by the way.
Yeah. A couple of things that I want to talk about, which is number one, how many are CALLERLAB members here? All of you? How many have read the document Working with Squares and Rounds on the CALLERLAB website? How many were aware there was even a document out there? Okay. That particular document was designed in coordination with Roundalab and working. And I think it covers pretty much everything that both Don and Bob have talked about. When I walked in here with a outline that Mr. Gotta had prepared back in 1901, I think. He looked at it and he said, "Oh my God, where did you get that?" Okay. And he said, "Here's an updated copy," and that's the copy that he's passed out. But I want to talk about something a little bit different. We did this seminar last year also. The particular document I've been talking about, as is the handout, talks about these things of communication and talks about working and all these things. But let's go backwards a little bit further. How many of you are club callers? How many of you work with your clubs in putting on a dance from the aspect of themes? How many of you attend your club meetings? Okay. Is the club caller and cuer there? Are they the advisors? This is an area that I think we kind of gotten away from. And I hate to say it, but I really see it in the national callers. Because the national callers don't appear to be connected with a club, per se. They're out on the road and they're moving from city to city. And so they don't have the opportunity to create this lesson, if that's what you want to call it, together to work with the club in order to become a unit. Because the club and the dancers, the caller and the cuer are all one. We're all in it for one thing. And that's to have fun and a good time. Sure, any one of these people can not make it fun, or they can make it fun. Either way you want to go. And I think that's the direction that I'd kind of like to talk about a little bit more so than the other thing about whether or not I happen to be up in the stage and I'm queuing around and all of a sudden a caller walks up behind me and decides to set up his equipment. Okay? Sure, I've run into those situations. I've also run into the situations where a caller walked up to the stage and I had to turn to him and say, "Get off the stage." Okay? I've also been in this situation, as Bob mentions, that the noise level is so high that the dancers couldn't hear a word that I want to say. Okay? I I have much more power available to me than they do. In some cases, I got 500 watts of power that could blast them out if I wanted to. But that's not the way to go, and that's not the way to do. And so, in turn, working with your club on these issues, I think, is the direction that you need to go. Okay? I think that's probably the only thing I want to talk about at the moment. I'll let Roy pick it up from here and things that he wants to go, and then we'll come back to the question and answer area.
Thank you. Rob, do me a favor since you're up.
Who needs it?
It's just a... Yeah, it's also in your it's on the CD. It's on the CD. Yes. So, thank you, Ron. And I forgot. I'm looking at my moderator guidelines here, and I was supposed to mention that we would request that people turn off their cell phones or set them to stun. So, yeah. So, I'm going to go over some of the things that they covered. A lot of the things that I had on my handout what I was going to talk about, but a couple things that I want to address that came up, and very specific things that we don't often think about. Little things like one of the first things on my thing is in the equipment, speaker placement. A lot of callers have gotten very lazy. I'm not afraid to say that. That's where they put the speaker. They set up a table and they put their double yak on the end of the table, and they're all happy with that. Well, it's fine with them, but most of the cuers have to read their cue sheets because I'm personally not able to memorize 500 round dances, which is usually about how many I have with me. So I'm working off the table, which means I'm behind the speaker. So I do not have an accurate sense of what's out there on the floor. You know, the caller, they'll wander around, and if they don't like being behind, they'll wander out in the front. So when I learned my craft and when I was watching Betsy learn hers, one of the first things they told us was, you put your speaker on a stand. For one thing, it's the best way to sound the hall. It's the best way to cover the hall. Now, granted, we had larger crowds back then. But I always travel with a stand, and if I'm working not with Betsy and I'm doing early rounds, I really try and get there before the caller so I can at least set up the speaker. And I know it'll be on a stand and slightly behind me. We have very sophisticated microphones and speakers designed for our craft, and you're not going to get feedback. Assuming you're not using an El Cheapo microphone. And I realize some of us start out that way. So one of the things, and I say in there, I am a little sensitive to that issue, but it's there. The other thing, when you're setting up on the table, you see a lot of the cuers, they use that little tabletop thing. And they have their laptop, and then, of course, they put it in a place where all the dancers see is their face. I don't agree with that either. But I am now using one of those because I have neck issues. I still am above all of that so the dancers can see my face, but I don't need a place to leave it there permanently. Just leave me a place where those four legs can sit. And when I'm done, I'll take it off the stage. But these are little things that we didn't used to have to consider. The other thing with equipment, your Betsy doesn't always work with me, especially on weekdays. And there's some clubs where they have their club cuer, and they don't want me, and that's fine. And when I can go with her, we get to round dance. But she knows which of those cuers use records. And in those days, she takes the 300 instead of the 150. Now the cuer, he's very responsible, always has his turntable, but this way there's only one that they have to set up. But I've heard stories where, a cuer will show up and the caller's there with his MA150, and the cuer's going, where do I play my records? And the cuer didn't bring a turntable. Bad idea. That's the cuer's fault, not the caller's. But callers can be, if they know in advance, then prepare for it. Little things, volume and tone controls. And I periodically still get the hairy eyeball from Betsy. Because, by the way, I'm Roy Gotta from New Jersey. My wife, Betsy Gotta, has been calling for 50 years. I've only been cueing for 34, I think it is. So I'm still learning. But I'm finally getting in the habit of, both of us are, when we're done, we turn all the volume controls down. Especially within this era of laptops, where when you record the music, even within even within your own pieces of music, not all of them were recorded at the same level. So I'll forget to turn it down, and she'll hit the play button because we use separate laptops. Even though all of our music is on both of them, we like to prefer to work off our own. And all of a sudden, the dancer's in the back of the room. What was that? So we're in the habit. Good habit to get into when you're working with a call, cue or whatever. When you're done with your set, turn the volume off. It just solves all kinds of problems. We talked about a little bit etiquette and the callers coming in and disrupting the cuer when they're doing early rounds and stuff like that. One of my biggest bugaboos, and we're talking with, because I know there's some cuers in here, as equally impolite as the caller coming in the middle of the rounds. As the cuer finishes their last set of rounds in the square dance, they pack up and leave during the last tip. How rude is that? And don't be afraid to say something. Hey, there's probably some dancers out there, some of your round dancers are in that last square that might like to say good night to you. And nice job. Little things like that. We talk about chasing dancers away. So, we have a national convention. That's who's doing a tip 10 o'clock at a national convention. They came in and started tearing the decorations down behind her. I didn't let that one slide. All right, we talk about programming and stuff, yada, yada. End of the dance especially, when you get to that last hour. And that's when you come to, I always am asking the caller, how many tips do you plan to do before the end of the dance? And callers don't usually think that cuers actually they program also. I have certain rounds that I like to do in my last set. Or requests that I've ignored up to that point. So, and if I'm thinking, okay, plenty of time for 3 tips, and the caller's thinking, cuer better stretch it out so we only have to do 2 tips, there's some conflicts there. But usually, when a guest caller's coming in and it's a club cuer usually controls the tempo of the dance because they know what the club wants. I was cueing someplace, we were both guests, and the club told me when the tip is over, you start the rounds. The caller comes up and goes, whoa, give me some more time. And says, I'm sorry, I'm being paid by the club, and they told me to start as soon as you were done. And then you got a problem, go see the officers. But usually we say, okay, how long a break do we have? Or do we start right away? Do we give them 2-3 minutes before we start the rounds? What's the club policy? All right. That was that. I had a little thing in my here at the end of my handout that says music. Now, this is not my forte, but I put it in here because I've heard this discussion. I've had this discussion. It was mentioned earlier about, you're going to do a big rock and roll type of house rockin' piece of music, and then the cuer comes up and does Rainbow Connections or Edelweiss. Right? And I'm still not so sure that really affects the dancers all that much. I really am not all that convinced. The only thing that I think really has an effect on the dancers is when everything is one. Everything you do is, A-line, house rock and this, or everything you do is, God. Now, understand that sometimes you're limited by the dancers that you have. For a while I was teaching dancers, all they knew was cha-cha and rumba. And they were 80% of the dancers on the floor. So that's what they got, with the occasional one thrown in for the other 20%. But there's a thing in here, and I don't necessarily understand it, but it's in here. Mike Jacobs was an expert at this type of thing. I got the workshop from him, where just the type of music. We're like the Round Dance Houston, tons of steel guitar. And if Mike was calling and I did the Round Dance Houston, he would not have a patter record that had steel guitar in it. Now, I'm not that sophisticated where I can detect all of that and listen to the caller's music that accurately. But if I'm screwing up that way, I would hope that the caller would talk to me. Say, if that comes up and this and that, and do this, maybe you might want to not do that particular round dance after that particular singing call, only because of the emotional effect that it has on the dancers, minor keys and things like that. Things that I'm not musically inclined, I don't understand them, but I appreciate it when I'm told that was a bad idea. I also like it when I'm told that was a really good idea. So, and there was a thing about tables. You need to know your area. There's an area in lower New York State, Rockland County, whatever. They are absolutely used to the caller and cuer having their separate tables, separate equipment. Even when we show up together, there are 2 tables there. And most of the areas that we seem to work in, they're used to the caller and cuer working off of one set of equipment. But you need to understand that's not necessarily always what the club is expecting. I never go to a dance when I'm not working with Betsy without a set of equipment capable of covering whatever hall I'm in. And I have no problem setting up early and saying to the caller, would you like to use my equipment? Most of the time, they don't have a problem with my speaker, but they'd rather use their own amplifier. So all we do is swap out amplifiers. And I have had one occasion where the caller said, no, I prefer you set up your own equipment. Okay, fine. And we can do that. I think that's all I had because these guys covered most of my handout. But I think the bottom line, what we're talking about is, we need to avoid these situations because, boy, the dancers will just pick up on it in a heartbeat that we're not, communicating. And I ran into a situation where, I forget who said, where the caller came up and said, no, you can't start yet. I think I even know who the caller is. But if that happens, and I'm trying to remember, was that was you said that, Bob? Was that at your home club and someone else came in, or you were both guests? Both guests. You need to go to the organizers of the event and see what they want. Because I've been in situations like that where they told me, okay, you got to wait, and I'm seeing the dancers out there going, hello, and I have this on. I don't do it from the microphone, but I got to stay on the side. They want us to wait. If you have a problem, you need to go talk to the organizers, and I'll be happy to switch it out. So.
I think the lack of music at that point really drags down.
Oh, microphone. It's on.
Claudia from Spokane. I think the lack of music at that point when you have to wait is what drags it drags the dancers the dance down. I think you need to have noise.
Cool. Speaking of music, and this I put on the cuers a lot because we tend to have a greater variety of music in our case. When there's a theme dance, we like to have music playing as the dancers come in. I don't know if all of you do that or not. But we have more of an opportunity, if there is a theme, to have music playing that works around that. We were doing a weekend and the evening dance, and the theme was Cut the Emerald. And the theme was for the Emerald City, Wizard of Oz. Okay, good. So they're coming in, and I, of course, had Rainbow Foxtrot, which is Somewhere Over the Rainbow, and I have Rainbow Connections, the Kermit the Frog version, and I have Rainbow Round My Shoulder by Bobby Darin, and anything I had in my case with rainbow in it, or sung by Judy Garland, was playing. And so that goes out to the cuers more than the callers. But as far as the callers are concerned, you might want to consider having some of that regular type of music on your laptop, since we have that available to us, so that not necessarily square dance music is being played as the dancers are coming in, but just music that applies to the theme, especially if it's a 50s or a 60s dance. We do those all the time. And we had a neat opportunity a few months ago where it was a 50s and 60s dance. So halfway through, we changed clothes and we changed eras. So that was fun. Yeah. All right. So at this point, and I was hoping to have a half hour for question and answers. We actually have closer to 40 minutes for question and answers. And we will open up to that. Please speak on the microphone because we are being recorded.
I'm Erin Byers from California. I wanted to share something with you guys that I do, and then I wanted to get feedback from the panel on how they handle the situation, because they touched on it, but they didn't tell us how they handled it. And that is the fact that in almost every situation, there are more square dancers in a hall than there are round dancers. And which means that usually there's a lot of talking going on during the rounds. You guys mentioned it, but you didn't talk about how you handled it. And I actually have 2 different ways that I handle it. I'm just going to mention one, and then I want to see what you guys say. I get up on the mic, and I get everybody's attention, and I go, you know what? This is the most amazing activity on the planet. And they're like, yeah. Go. Because everybody in our activity works together. And we know that the square dancers are planning to be respectful of the round dancers and be quiet during round dancing and allow us to dance. And we love them for it. And in fact, round dancers, once you give the square dancers a round of applause in advance, thanking them for being quiet during the rounds. Okay, they know it's BS. We all know it is. But it works. Basically what I'm saying is be aware. I know you're not thinking because you're with your friends. You love these people. You enjoy talking to them. It's one of the reasons you come to the dance. But don't forget while you're doing that there are people who are on the floor trying to round dance. It just brings that up without me saying, would you shut up? Which, yeah, that doesn't work. I know. I actually had somebody else do that at a dance of mine recently. Another cuer's wife came up and grabbed the mic from me and said, shut up. But everyone knows her and they know she's like that. So anyway, but it works for me. So I'd like to know what you guys do.
Interesting. And I'm going to tell you one of the problems that we have at square dancing with rounds happens to be the venue we're in. In some cases, the visiting area is separated from the dance floor, okay, either by a wall or a partition or downstairs. That's a different issue. Then you got the issue of, hey, would you guys come up from downstairs and come up and square up or come up and round? I mean, that's one thing that we have. So sometimes your environment is an issue. Sometimes you're in a hall that is hot, I guess I would say. A live or a hot one, which means I can stand over here and I can say, it is loud at the other end.
Yeah, we refer that to as a bright hall. It's a bright, very bright hall. Yep.
Yeah, well, depending upon what you're at, we happen to have fortunate that we own our own hall. And we had to bring in a sound engineer in order to put some sounding equipment in here. And when he walked in, he did this. And his reply was, boy, this is a hot hall. And that was his comment. So that's why I always call it a hot hall. Getting back to the issue of what do you do when there's interference? Because that's really what we're talking about. We're getting interference in the communication from the cuer out to the dancer. That's what's going on. I've heard, as Aaron is, shut up. I've also heard people, shh. I've also heard people do this. No sound at all. Okay. I've also heard the cuer tell the dancers, would you turn around and look at the other people and go, shh. I've seen and heard all of those things. I'm not sure there's any good way on the thing. Other than my preferred way is to have those dancers out on the floor dancing. That's my preferred way on the thing. So now the question is how many people do we have that both square and round? Okay? And I understand there's over the night, especially as the aging goes on, people can't do every activity during the night. Okay? And there is some setting back. But the more you can encourage people to either learn to square or learn to round, that to me is the best way to handle it. What do you guys think?
That's a long-term solution.
Betsy Gotta, New Jersey. Sometimes, since I work with Roy a lot, if we're at a different club, one of the factors in the cuer having to make an announcement about the square dancers being loud is that they're already now irritated. No matter how politely they say it, unless they do it before the whole dance, no matter how politely they try and couch it, the irritation is somewhere in their voice. But if I, at the end of my singing call, say, folks, Roy's going to be doing some rounds. This is a really lively hall. Whatever you say, we can hear. Don't whisper any secrets. But talk softly while you're socializing. Thank you. And I'm not irritated, so it won't come across.
Thanks, Betsy.
I have done similar things to what Aaron has done. Usually, as the caller, and you can tell that the crowd is still a little rowdy, you can do what Betsy has done and say, okay, remember the round dancers are coming up, and the dancers need to hear their cues just like you needed to hear the calls. So if you show them a little courtesy and just keep your conversations down, or I, as a cuer, will get up on the stage and there I will do some of the shh, and not say to the round dancers that are out there, you shush the other dancers up, but just on the stage, or say an important announcement for everybody, and then they hush, and then thank you.
How many caller cuers do we have in here? I'd like to hear from the caller cuers side when you go to do your rounds, this particular issue. How do you handle it? Come on, you guys.
If it's different than what's already been said.
Mine is not different. I go with Betsy. I will, as in the role of a caller.
Name, who are you?
Carter Ackerman, Pennsylvania. In the role of a caller, I will try to tell them to be quiet, not in the role of a round dance cuer. I think that's important.
I'm going to hit a couple other guys back here.
Virgil Forbes from Maryland. And I use the Betsy line, but then I learned that from her. We won't say how many years ago, will we, Betsy? Okay. One club I am caller cuer. One club has a club cuer. The rest of the time when I'm traveling, as caller, I kind of feel a responsibility for the behavior of the square dancers who are not rounding. So I try to get across to them, hey, the round dancers want to dance too. They paid just as much to get into the hall. I don't always say it quite that way, but the idea is they have an equal right to an enjoyable dance experience as you do.
Okay. I usually just turn the sound up to their ears bleed and then they're quiet. So one more comment on this, then I have something else I want to get to.
Bob Amsbury, Spokane. I never thought about it until a couple of comments. When I used to do both call and cue, I don't remember all the crowd noise. I guess the caller, they're used to your voice because you just called. So when you start cueing, they're more in tune to somebody totally different, like Claudia and or Ron. And it's got a different voice. Maybe it's not as, the mic technique's not as good or whatever. And they're learning. I mean, I don't know. What you need is their attention. You can't just start cueing because it's time and they're all over the floor, and they are in some environment. But when I did both, I don't know, it appeared like it was easier because when I had the mic, maybe they just, hey, he's talking. It's not like, oh, it's just a cuer. And I don't mean it negatively. I'm just trying to, I never thought about it, but I didn't have the problem I don't feel there is today. Now, maybe there's more cuers and more round dancers and the crowd's not the same or the hall or the sound, but it's an interesting point. I'm aware of it because of what that, but it's, once you've heard the caller call and now you're going to hear the same voice, whether it's quiet or loud, it's still the same voice, so you're more in tune than somebody else. Okay, we're going to do this now. I just say that,
Okay. Yeah. So, something I want to bring up, and I want to get the input from the callers on this one, in that it's come up recently, and I've heard mixed things, and it's something I think would be valuable for the recording. You've just done one of your favorite singing calls, and then the cuer puts on the pop version of that song with, say, a vocal by, Connie Francis or Celine Dion. How does that sit with you? I open the floor for comments now.
Virgil Forbes. Actually, I try to make, I won't say a joke of it, but appreciate the fact that you have the same song in two totally different styles. Half the time I don't think the dancers even notice, at least not right in the front where they're thinking. Subconsciously it's there, just like with Mike Jacobs, the steel guitar versus steel guitar. The dancers aren't really aware. They notice it subconsciously. But I work with Tim Pilichowski quite a bit, and he and I have a running gig that we will use the same singing call and the same round dance. And halfway through each, we'll switch microphones. And the dancers love it. It really gives them a trip.
Well,
yeah, I'm Skip Brown from Portland, Maine, and my wife is a cuer. In fact, she is the best cuer in my family. Isn't that fair? And we work together most of the time. And I consider that we are not doing a square and round dance. I'm calling a square dance. She's conducting a round dance party. We're taking turns. So whatever she does doesn't affect me. Whatever I do doesn't affect her. If I have done a singing call and then she does the same round in the next set of rounds, I'm flattered. She's imitating me. If she does something and I do a singing call that follows something she's done, I say, well, my God, I'll show you how that's done, really. And we have a lot of fun with it. But we really don't interfere with each other, and she doesn't bother me, and I don't bother her. When we were talking earlier about the noisiness of the square dances while the round dances were round dancing, we basically don't have that problem up in my area. It's smaller dances. We don't have large crowds, 150 people waiting while four couples round dance. We don't have that. But on some occasions where we do have a little bit of noise, I, as the caller, will say the round dancers are going to be out there round dancing, and we outnumber them 5-1. So let's hold our conversation down so they can hear the cues and the music. And it works, and it takes all the onus off the cuer. Thank you.
Any other comments on the... Okay, just I wanted to throw it out because of the subject that has come up recently in our area. I mean, Betsy and I do entire dancers. We call it a twofer dance, where we very specifically program, and actually every patter and singer is then followed by the two round dances, which were other versions of that patter and that singer. But that's designed, and people know in advance that that's happening. It's billed as a twofer dance. But I've heard some callers who get upset when the pop tune follows their singing call. I just wanted to get a feel for anybody else. So, okay.
I have a question that I wanted to ask because I run into it a lot of cases. I'm not sure about here. How many of you have square dances with no rounds? Okay. Do you have something other than rounds or just nothing?
In our area, if they don't have lines in between, they have, if they don't have rounds, they have lines. Oh, I'm Judy Grossnickel from Ogden, Kansas.
Jay Haynes, Pennsylvania. We have a club that has dances 2x2 on Wednesday nights and just squares on Saturday nights with nothing between. There's a long pause as though there was a round dance so that the caller gets that kind of a break.
Carter Eckelman, Pennsylvania. During the breaks, I do both rounds and line dances. The reason I do line dances, we have a lot of singles that like to do lines, and also during my square dance classes, I do one line dance a night for them, so that people are used to doing line dances when they learn to square dance.
Lanny Wheatland, Omaha, Nebraska. I call a lot in the Missouri area as I travel down that way. There's not much round dancing in the Missouri, down around Springfield, but it's starting to build. But there's a lot of people who like lines, and there's maybe 3 or 4 couples who like rounds. So what I do is I pick out a round dance that they can also line dance to. So they do both at the same time. The line dancers are in the middle, the round dancers are on the outside.
Oh, thank you. I'll get you in a minute, Betsy. My other part of that, or the reciprocal question is, do you have the noise factor with the lines as we do with the rounds?
So you can hand it to Betsy. Doesn't matter because there's nobody cueing the line dances.
Sometimes they are.
That's true. Sometimes they are. But
I was just going to say, Betsy Gotta again. I was just going to say that when I work for a club that does not have rounds in between the tips, I probably don't take more than a 4 to 5 minute break as perhaps a 5 to 6 to 7 minute break if there's a couple of rounds. And so I may consequently get in an extra tip. But I don't see, the noise then in between is not a factor since we're all just socializing. But I will set a timer so that it doesn't feel, as Jay said, like that long dead time. I also know people, there are music pieces, or they'll have something on their computer that will play for a certain number of minutes, and when that stops, it's time to dance again. And that way there's not dead air. But the noise factor about chattering over background music would not be a problem.
Thank you, dear, for segueing into the next thing I wanted to bring up. And this was not rehearsed. Situation that bothers me a lot, and I'm asking for the caller's help in this. Square dances with rounds, and it's not a large round dance floor, and you hear the square dancers on the side complaining that the round dancing is taking away from their square dance time. I'm sure we've all heard that, and I don't see necessarily people stepping up to combat that. 2 things that can happen there. 1, they could be correct. They could be right, that it's taking away from their square dance time, and I blame the cuer for that. That's the one where the square dance caller finishes, and I've had this conversation with cuers that are violators. Caller finishes their tip. The cuer's at the far corner of the room having a conversation. They walk up. I think I'll take that record, and well, it shows how far back, and I'll take that record. And next thing you know, the break is 12 minutes long. And I know when I'm doing rounds, I have 8 minutes, max. I try and get them done in 7 minutes. That's my goal. Because the normal break at a square dance is 5 to 7 minutes. And if I'm doing that, I'm not taking, and Betsy knows that in a 2.5 hour dance, she's going to get in 7 tips. Minimum. Minimum of 7 tips. Whether there's rounds or not. And if the round dance cuer is dawdling, I think it is the square dance caller's responsibility to tell them, you're costing me a tip. Or if the caller is reluctant to do that, have the caller go to the club officers and say, could you please talk to your cuer and have them be ready to cue at least a minute or 2 after I'm finished with my tip. Because that then negatively impacts the round dance world. And it's not necessarily the square dancer's fault. I blame cuers for starting this thing. And then as soon as it happens at 1 or 2 dances, it'll take 10 other dances done correctly to get that bad image out of the square dancer's head. So we need to nip it in the bud when it happens. And I implore callers to take the initiative to, if a cuer is costing you a tip, don't let them. Betsy?
Betsy Gotta again. I know of at least one club that Roy and I work for. It's a singles group. And each of these people have a different partner for a different tip or a different set of rounds. They have a number thing in the front that says this is square 4 and it'll be round 4 and square 5 and round 5. And they book different partners for that. And in our contract it says that there shall not be more than a 1 minute break between the squares and the rounds.
Carter, Ackerman, Pennsylvania. I agree with Roy in that the cuer has the power to destroy the momentum of the evening by making long breaks. When I do 2 rounds, I always start them right away. If I do 1 round, I usually give them about a 3-minute break, and then start the round. That way, the break is a consistent length for most of the dance.
And thing you can, Lanny in the back, and while you're passing the mic, what information you can, especially if it's a newer cuer. We still got, about 20 minutes. A newer cuer. Their programming can impact that. I have a written list in addition to my cue sheets, which are in here, which gives me the time of every round dance. And I'm not going to put on, say, Margaritaville, which is like 3 minutes and 50 seconds, and then follow it up with something that's 3 minutes and 12 seconds. If I'm doing a 3-minute round, I guarantee you that the next one is going to be a maximum of 2 minutes and 20 seconds. And so little things like that can really impact the dance. And if you see it happening, I'm sure the cuer would welcome your constructive advice. Lanny.
Lanny Weekland, Omaha, Nebraska again. There is a way to train some of the cuers who are delinquent to get to the mic quick enough. I worked with a round dance cuer in South Dakota who was traditionally known for taking very long breaks in between tips. I put the singing call record on when I'm done with my figure, and he comes up, the cuer most generally comes up and shuts it off. So the whole record goes through 3 minutes. It resets itself. It starts playing again. I go up to the microphone and I call the squares to start. And he comes running up and he says, "Oh no, it's my turn to do rounds." I says, "No, you've already missed your time." Every time after that, I worked with this cuer 5 or 6 times since. As soon as I'm off the microphone, he's there.
Virgil Forbes. I guess maybe I've been lucky. All I have worked with in the last 5 or 6 years are really professional cuers. All the shortcomings that have been mentioned here, I personally haven't seen a one of them, at least not recently. There's some terrific cuers in the Mid-Atlantic who are very professional. They're ready to go. I was late to a dance the other night. Traffic on I-95. Not that anybody would misunderstand that. His equipment was set up. He was doing pre-rounds. I brought in my computer only, plugged into his 150 because we know we both used the same hardware, and off we went. 45 seconds from the end of the singing call till the first cue, about the same from the end of the last cue to the first bout of your partner. And the dance flows. It moves. And he got a little long one night, so the last tip consisted of a 45-second patter and a singing call.
Bob, you had your hand up front. Are you good? You okay? He's not sure.
I'm gonna play the devil's advocate.
Bob had his hand up. No good? Okay, sit down.
Bob Amsbury. It's interesting to hear these comments, and they're all good, and they all have a place, and I guess that's what we're here for, to listen and say, does that fit my environment? I mean, I've had cuers where, and I said it earlier, keep the tips short. If you're going to dance from, let's say, 7 to 10, whether you do 7 tips or 4 tips, you're still going to keep the dancer 7 to 10. So do short tips. So the round dance cuer gets to also cue. I've seen callers call, and they're in the Spokane area. They'll call, a 25-minute patter, and then the cuer doesn't do half a program. And it's a shared program. You got to call the 3 hours, whether you do it in 3 times or it's 8 times. Who cares? You're still calling the same length of dance. It's 3 hours or whatever it is. Think of the cuer and keep it short. And I worked at that because I used to be, let's say, maybe a little longer than I wanted to be. And this is the way it is. We've had one cuer if you take a break. My clubs, we break during the dance. So we come back out on the floor. But I can remember the older days, not too long ago, where the cuer would say, "Okay, you finished calling before the break. It's my turn to cue now because the break is over." And, oh, okay. And she wants just as much cue time as the caller wants. And you go, okay, but normally you do squares, you get them on the floor, being everybody versus the rounds. But you got to know that and be, first time I was, go ahead. I mean, it was her turn, technically, because we share, but it catch you off surprise. So why did she want to do that? Anyway.
Good. What we're going to be doing for the last...
Before you jump out of that, I was going to say play the devil's advocate going the other way, which is I have seen where a caller will run a 20-minute patter tip. Okay? Yeah, I mean, he'll run 20 minutes doing a patter tip, and I see tongues hanging out on the thing, and then follow it up with 1, 2, or maybe 3 singing calls. Okay? I mean, that's just the opposite of what you're talking about, type thing. What does a cuer do then? It really comes back to the original thing that we were talking about, is we got to have some communication. We got to talk. Okay? Whether it's from the club to the caller and the cuer, whether it's between the caller and the cuer themselves, or whether it's between the dancer and the club. Okay? We need some good communication.
Okay, I got a little less than 15 minutes. I've got things written down to fill the time because that's my job. But if there's anything that anybody wants to talk about that fits within the parameters of what we're discussing, raise your hand, and except for Aaron, we'll call on you. So but let me make my one point to start that. Talked about when a caller or cuer is late, and that can create some, okay, fine. Not all the, let's say there's early rounds and the caller's late. Well, not all cuers can do a tip, so to speak. I tried one once, and they came up afterwards and they said, that was, we really appreciate you filling in and doing that, but you know that like singing call you tried, you really might want to practice. This was like an 80-year-old woman. God, I love her, but I have in my music, I have enough of Betsy calling, mainstream and plus, and some A2, that I could do an hour of each just by plugging it in. She has, actually I don't have it on her laptop yet, but when we were using mini discs, she had a full mini disc of me cueing. So that if the cuer was late, and it happens sometimes, she could fill in the round dance program with stuff that I had cued. If the caller was late, and it happened to me twice, I was able to plug in Betsy, which was really nice because when I said, I'll do the singing call, and I plug her in, and somewhere over the rainbow, and I'm going, and it's Betsy's voice. So, I mean, you can play it up. Now, I know not all of you have a cuer in the family, but I'm sure if you approached one of your local cuers, you could have something like that on your laptop or whatever it is you're using to play your music, and be prepared for those type of instances. And I don't think there's a legal problem with it, but as far as music sharing. But so you only need a few things, so why not have it there just in case? Aaron.
Yeah, actually, I just want to say quickly that when we were using mini disc, we had the same thing. And I did a dance. I was doing a dance in Southern California, and Scott was a caller, but he was flying down from Northern California, and his plane was late. So he said, there's nothing stranger than you walk in the door to a hall and hear yourself calling coming out of the room on the end. But that wasn't actually what I wanted to bring up. One of the things that I try to do, I try to make sure that everything that I do is to help the dancers have fun. And the more I cooperate with the caller, the better that's going to be. And one of the things I do to make that even better is I try to balance the speed and tempo of the dances that I'm doing. I've been to a couple dances. I was somewhere and the cuer did Spaghetti Rag followed by I Want a Quick Step. Well, not only could I not breathe, but nobody had enough energy to do the square afterwards. Everyone was like dead. So I always try to make sure if I start with a peppy intermediate, I go to an easier, more lower key, easy level so that the dancers don't get worn out and they have plenty of energy to keep going during the night. Same reason if the caller does a really super high energy tip, I don't want to play music that's going to bring the enthusiasm down, but I want to play something just enough slower that they can build their energy back up to keep going on. So, and as we all know, with our aging population, it becomes even more and more important to remember that.
Henry Furry from Pennsylvania. I just want to comment one thing to Roy as far as using if a caller or cuer is late. I personally don't think there's anything wrong with that. That keeps the dancers active until that individual does get there. Although I know under two different circumstances, I've gone to a club and I'd say, okay, are we going to have rounds tonight? Oh yeah, we're going to have rounds tonight. And they put on cuers on tapes. And I said, you don't have a cuer here? No, we can't afford one. I said, you're really treading on thin ice by doing this, and it's really not right. But they did it, and I just, that's kind of a bad situation.
Go ahead, Lanny.
Yeah, I want to emphasize that Lanny Weekland, Omaha, Nebraska, has said it on the music piracy meeting yesterday. They've changed our copyright laws. If you are not a cuer and you have someone else's music on your laptop with cueing rounds and it's a digital music, you are breaking the law. It is not allowed unless you own the music. So be very careful with that.
Especially in Nashville.
Yeah, it's not a problem for us because we own together. We own the music. It might simply be a matter of, well, you might have to buy a few round dance records, or for 99 cents. Just have the person cueing some pop music, and then you can take care of it. Legally, there's so much crap going on. Although I have been informed that in certain instances, BMI and ASCAP people are pretty relentless, but they also understand certain emergency situations. And something popped up somewhere, and they allowed a situation such as that. But with it's not a recurring thing. You're not doing this, and so it's almost like an IRS audit. It depends on your auditor. But you probably should protect yourself, though, and own the music. It's a good point.
I think I'm going to come back to ask the other question, which I mentioned about communication. For those that are out, how many of you communicate between you, the club, and the cuer prior to the dance? Well, I understand you two would communicate. Yeah. So that raises the question, very few hands came up. Does that mean you're doing it on the fly or at the dance instead of prior to the dance? And that's one of the things that is in all of our documentation, which is talk about it before it happens.
Two in the back. Yep.
Okay. Not again. After. Do you have something, Jay?
That the CALLERLAB standard caller contract has a space for, if there's rounds, who's the cuer and what have you. I always ask if I'm booking a dance out of town, are there rounds, who's the cuer, and if I don't know that person, I ask for the phone number. Just so we can touch base, make sure that, I only generally carry my MA150. I generally do not have a turntable in the car. But if he says, I'm strictly vinyl, okay, I'll throw the Micro 75 in the back seat just in case. But my preference is, if I don't know the cuer, and most of the ones in Mid-Atlantic I know I've worked with before, we know the hardware, I'd like to know, at least to say, hey, do I need to bring something?
Verge, how about theme-wise and all that? Do you have that conversation with them? Not only just equipment, but what about anything else about the dance?
I generally do not discuss theming with the cuer. If there's a dance theme, of course, that's listed in the contract, and I prepare my musical program separate from the cuer. It's just, as I said before, I think the dancers are not immediately aware, even when the square dance round and singing call and round dance are the same song. Most of them sound so different anyway. So I generally do not discuss theming or program with the cure.
We got about 4 minutes left.
Lanny Weekland again. I was just going to say I might be a little bit fortunate. I travel quite extensively in the Denver area, and I've worked with every cuer in the Denver area, and I know them all quite well and know their capability. The same way with the ones I work with in Minnesota. It's always the same cuers at the same dances. I use a lot of the same circuits. So I do not have to court to talk to those other cuers to know what they're going to do because they're all very professionals. If it's a theme dance, I've got a theme dance coming up in Denver in a couple of weeks. It's a 50s dance. And I know the cure there will be doing all 50s music, as will I, as Square. So we've already programmed together because it's stated in the contract.
Okay, one more comment, and then we've got to wrap it up. Carter, you had your hand up.
Yes, at our home club, I cue all the dances, but we have visiting callers for half the dances. So always before the dance starts, I will communicate with the caller how long we're going to take for the rounds, and I usually tell him how long the tip should be, or how long our people prefer to dance, and to avoid the long job. We always communicate before the dance starts.
I want to thank you all for coming out to this session. I want to thank our panelists, Ron and Georgine Woolcock, Don Casper, Bob Amsbury, his wife Claudia, and I'm Roy Gotta. Once again, the whole theme is just be prepared for anything, especially if you don't know who you're working with. And then when you get there, talk to them. Worst that could happen is they're miserable, whatever, and don't want to talk to you. That's fine, but usually people can work it out. So thank you again for coming. Oh, wait, I got one more. Hurry up, Skip. You got 17 seconds.
I'll talk real fast. Skip Brown from Portland, Maine again. And cuers in their own right are performing artists and stars every bit as much as square dance callers are. And I had this pointed out to me quite pointedly 2 conventions ago in New England. I walked into a plus hall where I was the next caller up, and there were 12 squares out there dancing to the caller and my wife, who was the cuer. I says, wow, they're all here. Wow. She finished cueing. I got up on the stage and got my record out and put it around and looked. My wife was gone, and 10 of the squares were gone as well. So I learned I was not the big star. They were all in there for her, not me.
Oh, yeah, I get that all the time. Thank you, everybody. Break time.